Welcome to Inside the 90. This is the podcast where we dig into what it's like to live inside the 90-day world of EOS. And excited today to have Rex Frank on. A little bit of backstory on how Rex and I met. We were at IT Nation last November and trying to get from the hotel lobby to the conference, and saw him with his IT Nation bag on and looked like he was booking an Uber. And I was like, "Hey, are you going to the conference?" And he said, "Yeah." So we shared an Uber, and that Uber ride led to an EOS conversation, which led us here today. So Rex, very excited to have you on today.
I'm super happy to be here. And I think you steered the conversation toward you and EOS conversations. Be fair.
I may have. I dig. Well, it was interesting for me. It was my first time at IT Nation, and every conversation down there, EOS popped up. So just the MSP community, just so open with each other. That was really surprising how much collaboration there is amongst competitors, even in similar areas or regions. But then just the passion for EOS and how everybody's really adopted it. So that was really cool.
Yeah, most of the sessions at that conference are put on by partners right there. So, and that's really where I got my passion for helping other partners was I only missed 2009. So they've had it 20 years. They've had that IT Nation conference. And we probably should define MSP, right? Like, I don't know. It's a managed service provider, IT managed service provider industry, taking care of, other people's computers is sort of what our industry was. I grew up in the industry. It started in 1988 as a tech, right? And in the early 90s got promoted into that service manager role. And I remember in 2004, the owner that I work for, his name's Oli, is probably my best friend in the world, actually, even though I haven't worked for him for almost 25 years. But he was in a peer group of other IT service provider owners, and it was before managed services had a name, right? We were trying to figure out what would even the service was we were delivering and how to deliver it. And the owners were having these owner peer group meetings, and they were holding each other accountable to financial metrics and working on best practice and sharing goals and objectives and that kind of stuff. And just, they were all non-competing geographies, right? So there was a lot of truth and openness in the room. And they were trying to figure out what managed services was. And they said, well, we're struggling to be on, to make progress here because we have to work through our service managers. So let's get our service managers in a peer group with the same facilitator. The owners weren't in the room. And that facilitator's name was Steve Bowser, started holding us accountable to understanding the financial metrics, right? When we first got our little report books of what was happening financially, they'd say, well, why did your labor go up? We'd be like, I don't know. But we'd all go back and try to figure it out, right? So it helped us all with our financial acumen as technicians turning into service managers. And then we started doing a lot of goal setting, and we'll talk a lot about that today, I think. But, and I got to tell you, in that peer group, I was way more conscious of not making a goal with my peer group than I was with my boss, right? Like I was way more worried about telling my peers that I didn't make it. And we also did a ton of best practice sharing. And, that I think was sort of the start for me of understanding that I had a role as a leader of doing strategic goals, right? Understanding what we have to achieve this year or this quarter, and then going back to the office and translating that into some tactical goals for each of the people. EOS wasn't around, but that is the first group that we started talking about the Rockefeller habits, right? Scaling up.
Yeah.
And that was my first introduction to, running the business according to a business operating system. Went back in like 2007, 6. I was in the group from 2004 to 2007.
And then when did you transition into starting your own company?
Well, I was living in Southern California, and my father-in-law wasn't doing well up in Seattle. So I talked with Oli a lot about it because like I really believed I was going to retire from Alvaca Networks, but we made the decision to, my wife and I and our kids would move up to Seattle and kind of help be there for my father-in-law. And that was when I took a job. I left about a 35-person company. We were doing around $4 million in managed services revenue for a $10 million MSP up in the Seattle area. And my job was to create a managed services practice inside of this company, right? They had about, I don't know, 4 million in services revenue, but none of it was like less than $10,000 a month of managed, all you can eat service revenue. And I remember making this list of all these operational things that I needed to work on to put in place to create this flat fee IT managed services practice. I needed to standardize some contracts. I needed to standardize the way we work tickets from triage, dispatch, and time entry. I needed to standardize the way we checked all of our client backups every day, right? And did test backups and standardize the way we make sure that we deploy patches every month on time, the same way, consistent quality of service. And I made a really important decision because the 19 years I was with Oli, I was still the technician, right? I wouldn't let go of my clients or the company's biggest clients that I thought if I wasn't the one that serviced them, they would probably leave us, right? And by the way, I did leave and moved up to Seattle. Fast forward 10 years, guess how many of those clients that I wouldn't let go of, they were all still with Alvaca Networks, right? But I made that decision. I'm not going to be the technician. Like if my tech skills are needed, I'm only going to use them to help or teach or coach, one of our other engineers. But that really allowed me to take the book, The E-Myth, to heart, right? Go to work on the business, not in the business. And, I tell you, after 18 months, we went from, close to zero managed services revenue to hitting what we called at the time the $1 Million Club, right? The $83,000 a month in managed services revenue. And I really learned my biggest regret was not, as I was growing into a manager and a leader, not letting go of the technical work sooner so I could have focused on that. I think I would have done a way better job for Alvaca Networks had I done that.
And there's that control. And sometimes it's not literally like control. It's a care. It's a passion. It's want to serve the clients, right? And it's a fear of the organization, dropping the ball somehow. But did any balls ever drop?
Oh, constantly. And we had a management cadence. Nowadays I would call it the rhythm of the business, right? But we had a management cadence that we were working, and I would say, according to how we felt about it then, we were getting an A+. But looking back on what I've learned as I, fast forward almost 15 years from that time, right? I would probably give us a B+.
Yeah.
And then I changed to a different company also in the Seattle area into 2008, and I got out that list of all these operational things I needed to work on, right? So I got hired as a director of operations. They were about $1 million in managed services revenue at the time, but they weren't really making any money. It was like lose 5% this quarter, make 5% the next quarter. Gross margin was down, meaning that there just wasn't enough gross margin to cover selling, general, administrative, SG&A expenses. So they were kind of like just tooling along. That owner had grown the business really quickly. And I remember being on the job interview, and he was going to put me on a bonus plan that said I would have a salary I could live with, but my bonus was going to come from increasing gross margin dollars quarter over quarter. And I remember him saying, "I don't know if I can afford you," and I said, "I don't think you can afford not to."
Yeah.
And which is really out of character for me. If you knew me, that statement in of itself was really out of character. Later, he told me that was the reason he decided to bring me on. But again, I got out that list of all these operational things and just went to work one week after the next, picking an item on my checklist, making sure we documented it, trained it. When we do the implementation of a new process after we do the training, that's a really novel idea. But and then measuring, are people following the process, and just being very pragmatic about teaching and coaching until everybody is following the process, and then move on to the next thing, right? Get my check mark on that operational process and move on to the next thing. And the rhythm in the business, I had my meetings with the owner and the salesperson and myself, right? We weren't really following Scaling Up or Rockefeller Habits, and EOS wasn't around yet. This was 2009 timeframe. But I think we were committed to that rhythm of the business and understanding this is like, we have to be clear about what we're all working on and hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
And I tell you that owner's name was Jameson. He was the most attentive to accountability person I'd ever worked with, right? So anyway, in 2010 is when I started the business, right? So what had happened is that company I was working for was in a peer group, and I had the peer group background and experience, and I think of the 12 members in the peer group, it was called HTG, the Heartland Technology Groups, that Arlen Sorensen ran. I think I was the only service manager that the owner was bringing to the meeting in the group. But I had that acumen at that point to understand the financial metrics, right? I could look at everybody else's metrics and be like, how come your direct labor went down, right? Whatever. And I remember people saying, how do I get a Rex? And it was the weirdest thing to hear. But then really it was the peer groups and that accountability and go to work on the business and make something happen, right? You set a goal, stay focused on achieving it. And I remember in that peer group meeting, somebody saying, how is it you guys always achieve your goals, right? And I remember the first words that came out of my mouth before I even really thought about it was just act with urgency, right? Like we took that to heart in the leadership team. We just act with urgency, that like, we set this goal, it's not acceptable not to achieve it, right? Like, we've decided this is the most important thing. It's what we're going to work on. And so we just stayed focused on that. And then December 2010, I kept hearing, can you help teach my service manager how to run our service department the way you're running the service department over there? And it was classic E-Myth, right? Like the entrepreneur, the manager and the technician. It's, the myth is that the entrepreneurs start businesses, but the reality is it's the technician having an entrepreneurial seizure that ultimately starts the business. And so, that was sort of my story. And I talked to a couple people from the peer group. I talked to a couple people from an industry user group in the Seattle area. And it's kind of a little bit of a Cinderella story, because I was pretty much able to replace my income in my first month in business doing this, what I was calling, MSP operations coaching. And really the whole company was based on that checklist that I said I made a list of operational stuff I needed to work on, right? I just documented best practice, and I created this MSP coaching methodology around, we're going to talk to you, somewhere between 1 and 3 times a week. And if they were, fully a technician, I'd be like, you can't break away for more than 1 hour a week to work with me. And then I was always asking for 10% of their time, 4 hours a week, to work on the business. Like, you have to tear yourself away from the tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah.
For 10% of your time. If you can do that, we can be successful. So 1 hour a week with me as their coach, and later I hired other people to be coaches. And so 1 hour a week with your coach, and then 3 hours a week doing some sort of homework, making some progress. We created this thing that we called the 5 phases of operational excellence. Phase 1 is understand the best practice, right? Don't try and reinvent the wheel by yourself. Just go reach out to your community, whether it's your peers or your vendors or friends in the community. How do you do this, right? But you take all that in. That's phase 1. Phase 2, you take all that and the way you're currently doing things and document it into this is how we are going to do business, and it's future tense still. And then you have that training, right? Use that documented content to do training. And then after training, this is when we do phase 4, the implementation, right? We start doing things, whatever the new way is. And that's hard, by the way. And then the 5th phase is what I say takes twice as long as the first 4 phases combined, but nobody ever takes the time to do it, but it's the most important. That's the inspect what you expect. And that's where you have to have a way to measure, are people following the new process?
Yeah.
And it's not punitive. You're just identifying who you need to spend more time coaching, right? I do often talk about the maturity levels of the companies and kind of defined out these 4 maturity levels. And in the first maturity level, I have this concept that I call the rogue engineer. In the first maturity level, there's no such thing as a rogue engineer because the owner is so close to all the day-to-day interactions that they don't even need KPIs. They barely need any standardization. They're just kind of micromanaging everything. And because of that, their gut, their instinct is very clear, right? They know what's going on in the business. But as we move into the second maturity stage, and this is kind of, and I'm using some MSP definitions here, but there's sort of an owner and a service manager running the business. And again, at these companies, I don't usually, reading the book Traction is probably a good idea, but I don't think it's the right time to try to be implementing these things, right? The companies are usually under 15-ish people.
Yeah.
When they're in this second stage, but they want to start measuring and comparing themselves against the industry, and they try to use their systems and they try to run some reports, and none of it makes any sense, right? They can't get an SLA report that makes any sense to save their lives because there's no process or procedure or standardization in the way they're processing their tickets. The tickets go from new, somebody does a bunch of work for a long time, and then it goes to closed. And there's no data, no documentation, nothing
what happened in between.
Right. So we can't know how long it take us to respond, how long it take us to start working on it, how long did it take us to resolve it, right? Like there's no bits of data in there. And that's when these companies start saying, oh, we got to work on our triage, dispatch, and time entry process and try to get some standardization. And I always tell people that they know that they're at the end of this second stage because they look at these dashboards that they've been creating and they match the owner's gut, right? Like they can be all the way through the end of the second stage without, instrumentation and KPIs and scorecards and that kind of stuff because the owner's still close enough that their gut is accurate. And I also say this is when we identify who those rogue engineers are, right? The ones where you're trying to put process in place, but they just won't follow it, right? And we say things like owners, or we say things like clients love them. They can fix anything. They'll work all hours of any day. And, this is when you see owners go on all these Facebook owners groups out there and say, what do I do with this engineer that won't follow my process? And everybody in the community goes, fire him, right? And I advocate this is not the right time to do that because you probably do have a dependence on this individual, and they are doing great work for your clients. And the right thing to do is try to continue to coach them to get them on board with following your standard processes. And I, by the way, I am convinced all those people that said fire them, that it's because they want to hire them because they need but you're not going to move into the third maturity stage where your leadership team grows and develops and And now there's somebody from finance, admin, sales, the owner. Usually 2 or 3 people in the service department are helping run the MSP organization. And that's when the culture problem shows up, right? Because when the owner's connected to everybody and they're just their way working with them every day, the owner's culture just naturally comes through. But as the owner gets 1 or 2 levels removed, the culture becomes the culture of whoever their manager, their leader is. And that's why right as soon as they move past that 15-person mark, I'm like, okay, stop the presses, go read traction, because we're going to talk about it.
Well, during that journey for you, I mean, it sounds like, what you discovered is that there's accidental operating systems and intentional operating systems, right? And you were proactive in like, hey, let's put a system in place, which now becomes an intentional operating system. And it's almost like you were an accidental integrator before they were a thing, visionary integrator, like you've got the founder and then you've got the service tech. So I guess, when were you introduced to EOS, and what did that look like when you began to apply it?
I'm not even sure when the book EOS came out. Was it around 2014 or something, 15?
I should know that. I did look it up once and I forgot.
Oh okay. So anyway, I started the company in 2010, and it was me running the business. I started recruiting some peers in the industry to help me coach. Right, I went to IT Nation in 2011, and all I did was that list of things I say I work on. I did a 45-minute session, I think, and all I really did was say, here's the list of the stuff you guys got to work on. Here's a spreadsheet so you can track your progress, and this is kind of what good looks like on each of those, right? And the first, they ran the session twice. The first one had 30 people in a room that held 40 people or whatever. But then the second running of the session, there was like almost fights outside the door because the security people stopped letting people in, right?
I knew you were onto something.
I was like, what is going on? And I remember my friend Ken Sponsler that was in that peer group with me back in 2004 to 2007. I was like, hey, Ken, I haven't taken a server down overnight call in a year and a half since I started the company. And he's like, right? So anyway, by January or February, he joined the company. And then now there was 2 of us building and standardizing all this operational process and doing coaching. And then Chris Butler that I knew from that company I moved to Seattle to work for. I didn't recruit him away, but he left and started talking to me. So he joined the company. And a year after that, we brought 2 other industry, good, what I would call top-notch, Jay Hokie and David Schaffer, joined the company, right? And we were just growing at this kind of nice, steady clip. I was really, really happy with the growth. It's kind of interesting. If you chart the company's revenue growth, there was me running the company, and it had a steady growth. And then I decided to make Ken and Chris Butler business partners, right? And then there was a whole new level of accountability. Like, I have fiduciary responsibility now to other people, right? So the angle at which we were growing changed on the graph, right? Just by having accountability to somebody else. And then we discovered traction. I think it might have been around 2016 or 17, but we discovered the book Traction. Our partners, some of our partners were using it, right? It was a big topic of discussion in the peer group meetings that we were part of. And we thought we're business leaders, right? We're coaching other businesses on how to run their businesses. And we decided, we all read the book, and then we decided to self-implement. And, fast forward 4 quarters and not much had changed. What had happened was, we were trying to adapt Traction. We don't want to do it that way. Yeah. Let's do it this our own way, and on just too many topics. And the reality was, a year later, nothing had really changed.
What was one of those first things where you're like, yeah, we've got a process for that we'll use versus?
Well, I think the biggest thing we weren't doing well enough was, well, on headlines, we were spending way too much time, right? So then we weren't getting really to IDS.
Yeah.
On our scorecards weren't really dialed in as to what the most important thing to be watching was. And we were allowing ourselves to have way too much conversation during the scorecard section. And then accountability, right, on the action items check-in, there wasn't much. Like, we were way too lenient on each other. Yeah, we'll just push it till next week, right? But then the biggest problem was there just wasn't time left to IDS. I think we figured out, right seats on the bus thing. Like, we didn't really have problems there, but we knew this guy in the industry. His name was Jim Kinnear from E5 Leadership Group. We'd worked with him. He was a sales coach in the industry that transitioned himself, I think, more toward the EOS methodology. And we decided to do an engagement and actually hire an implementer, right? And ultimately, we used him for 5 quarters. But I remember he came and he did the 2-day focus session, which we kind of made him do one day because we'd already kind of done some of it. I think if you asked him, he probably would regret making that compromise with us. But we pushed him into it. He was kind of new to the EOS Implementer thing, so I'm sure he probably learned not to do that again.
Yeah.
But we got through that, and then he facilitated our 2-day first annual. And it was very freeing having a facilitator holding us accountable to the process, because that allowed all of us to not none of us had to be the facilitator.
Correct,
right?
Yeah.
All of us
had to participate.
Were able to participate and come up with a good 10-year, is it 10, 3, and 1 year?
Yeah.
I think is what it is. Yeah. And boil that down to what do we have to do this quarter? And I thought that was fantastic.
Do you remember what the early day 10-year target was?
It was interesting. I think we ultimately did tie a financial number to it, but at the time we'd maybe worked with 150 clients, MSPs, and we decided to set it, because we were more about impacting the industry in a measurable, positive way, right? Like that's what we came up with. So it was the number that we set had to do with number of partners within 10 years, and it might have been we were looking to get to 1,000 partners. Boy, that was 2017,
yeah,
maybe. But
it did that, as bringing partners together, having some momentum, but just jumping forward and getting everybody having a tip to the spear to point at. Was that something that everybody rallied around?
I mean, yeah, I could still see the spreadsheet where, like, if we want to be at 1,000 by then, with a little bit of logarithmic growth, we wanted to be, at 3 years we had to be here, at 1 year we had to be here, and at a quarter we had to be here, and build a marketing plan and delivery strategies around that.
So you've had, a good operational journey, and brought process, and then, we're bringing that to other businesses, and then brought it to your own. But then you made the decision to hire an implementer. And once you hired that implementer, how far into that journey with him did you really start to feel traction?
Yeah, well, we started feeling it like right away, but it started showing up in the revenue growth percentages within a couple of quarters. And I mentioned, me by myself, the graph was growing like this, and then I got some partners, and it started going at a new angle, and then we tried to self-implement, and really nothing changed. And then for almost a year, but then we got Jim Kinnear, the implementer, to help us really get traction in our business. And boom, for 2 years, there's a whole new angle that we were just consistently, having compound annual growth at a new rate. So.
And how did that affect your team? Like, what were you growing employee wise, with that revenue, and how did everybody else feel about operating within the EOS structure?
Our quarterlies were fun, right? Like, we would do what we called a reflect and reset, right? Where you just say, how did we do, and then what are we going to reset for the next quarter? And then when we'd have our 2-day annuals, and it's like there was just this constant sense of we got it done, and what's next, right? And that just kind of brings morale up in the whole company. And then we never had an office. We were always, even from 2010, everybody was 100% remote, and I remember around 2018 or something, we had this real EOS rhythm, and it's like, let's get everybody together, and we just chose Phoenix because it was winter time. We're like, we don't want to go north, we want to go south, but we chose Phoenix, and it was the first time that we had all 20 people together or something like that, and I could still remember the slide deck, right, where we're saying here was our rocks all throughout last year, here's how we did on attainment. And we had our annual planning last week, and this is what next year looks like. And just there was this whole sense of engagement and enrollment, and this is what the company is building, and this is what we're doing. And when everybody is on that same trajectory, that same path, building an organization to serve our partner community, it was an amazing feeling because we were just having success, and like I said, this new growth trajectory. And there was a revenue component and a profitability component that we measured, but it was always about how many partners we were having a measurable positive impact on.
And you talked before about in the MSP side of things from an employee, like till you get to about 15 people and culture becomes the issue. So did you see that in your journey? Was there a change when y'all were growing to that same 15 that you had experienced coaching other entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Internally, we followed the rule of 7, right? No manager should have more than 7 direct reports. And as the company grew, we had more managers. And if we weren't careful with culture, if we weren't careful with the mission, the vision, the purpose, the core values, and hiring and firing. We didn't really do much firing, but hiring based on the core values, like that was huge. Using the people analyzer, to determine right person, let alone right seat. Right, the people analyzer helps you determine right person. All of that. It was more integrated in the way we did hiring, but. Like just a difference. Like I got often. I got this is the best place I've ever worked. Thank you from the employees, right?
So on those core values, what were y'all's core values? 1 or 2 of them that y'all really rallied around.
Oh boy, you're stretching my memory now. That's.
Well, you mentioned one before the call, and I was going to say you mentioned the the act now, like we've got something.
Act with urgency.
Act with urgency. Yeah. Was that one of y'all's values?
Oh man, I should have looked them up.
No worries.
One of the things I do remember was having a pretty good IDS session in our annual about the word integrity. Right? Like we were really trying to figure out if integrity was just a permission to play. Did we really need to say that one? We had a couple sub definition lines under there that we ultimately ended up keeping it because of some of the sub definitions that were kind of more specific to what we were trying to do. And I'm struggling to remember the word that this one was attached to. But I remember one of the sub-definitions was we say what we think professionally and tactfully regardless of the impact on our revenue. Yeah. Right?
Wow.
We're a coaching firm, and so many times, the owner is the problem. And we decided we have to tell them that they're the problem, even if they fire us.
Yeah.
We have to tell them. But the professionally and tactfully part was like, okay, get with some other people, explain the problem, collaborate on how we're going to deliver this message. But that has never let us down. We've never been fired because of it. We've had people get angry and need to take a few minutes to absorb it, but they always say thank you afterward.
Yeah, we call those the behaviors, right? You narrow it down to a handful of core values. And then what we do is work with our team and with our clients as well and say, all right, what are the behaviors that demonstrate that? Where you know that it's lived out to where we can celebrate those. And those lists become really long, but they all stack up to whatever those handful of values are.
Yeah.
So transition now, right? So you were C-level operations, and then you're now with Pax8. So tell us the story from C-level to Pax8 and what your EOS journey looks like today.
Yeah, October of 2020. So the company was about just over 10 years old. And I got a call, right? This is mid-pandemic from a couple of people over at Pax8. And Pax8 is a cloud marketplace, the world's favorite place to buy cloud software, whatever, right? So the MSPs are buying their Microsoft and just a whole bunch of other cloud licenses from Pax8, and then they're using it in the way they deliver the service to their customers. And we were referring a lot of people to Pax8 because one of the things that they did was whatever PSA that our mutual client was using, they would automatically update the billing, right? If they're buying 35 Microsoft licenses, it updates the billing, so they're billing their client 35 licenses, right? So that PSA integration really helps smooth operational efficiency. So we were recommending them, but they called and Pax8 was talking to some of their fastest growing partners, and apparently working with C-level was one of a common denominator. And so I got a call in October from Nick Hetty, who's our company president now, and a guy named Craig Donovan, who's our corporate vice president of partner experience. And they were like, hey, we'd like to partner, or that was the premise of the phone call. But by the end of the call, it was pretty clear they didn't want to partner. They wanted to do an acquisition. And I did a lot of soul searching, talked to the two other partners, talked with my wife quite a bit. And we threw a pretty healthy number out at them. And Pax8 said, okay. And we were like, wait, what? No, but we went through the integration of the two businesses. And the interesting thing is Pax8 was a relatively young company. They grew quickly. They were around 800 million at the time. And they also had around 800 employees. But there really wasn't a business operating system. They were starting to dabble with OKRs. But ourselves and a company with Microsoft distribution rights in the UK, a company called Wirehive, was acquired. And the interesting thing was that Wirehive was using traction in EOS and C-level was using traction in EOS. And we ended up being pretty significant influencers in the leadership of Pax8 around this traction, this EOS, these level 10 meetings with all the accountability and how things actually are getting accomplished and getting done. So it was interesting. And this is a cool fact. I think I brought 18 people from C-level over to Pax8 in May of 21, and here we are in 2025, and I haven't lost a single coach or employee that came over.
Yeah. And that's often an oversight people don't talk about, but retention, when you have a healthy culture and you can cast a vision and people rally behind that, it really does help you with retention because people feel like they're on the right bus. They get excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I built a little wall around my team, right? I didn't want them to get frustrated with being in this corporate environment, because they love working at a small company. And I built a wall and kind of kept it that way for the first year. And we didn't there wasn't an academy, there wasn't an MSP coaching part already in Pax8, right? So we were able to come and be the new department. And it was interesting. We continued to run as almost like a little independent organization, and we continued using all of the EOS and traction methodologies. The company was getting more and more into using OKRs, kind of based on the book Measure What Matters, right there. But
and for that's objective and key results, right?
Objectives and key results. It's used by Google.
Yep.
Bono uses it in his organization, but I think Microsoft started using it. I'm not sure, but it was pretty easy to translate. Right, the objectives are rocks.
Correct.
Right. So, and probably for the first year, we continued using the language of EOS. But I tell you, the Wirehive organization and the Pax8 Academy organization were really productive, right? And it became a little infectious. That what's this operating system that we're using, and how are we integrating it with the OKR methodology? And next thing you know, we're having conversations with other departments around Pax8, around this level 10 meeting thing. So we continued we still to this day, and actually the level 10 meeting format has been adopted all around the Americas. We've reached Pax8, at the end of last year, around November last year, something like that. We crossed $2 billion in revenue.
And that's from 800 million to 2 billion in 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And so now that you're, just for those who don't know, I guess kind of the rails of EOS is really 10 to 250 employees, but there are many, people like yourself who ran it in an organization that was acquired or rolled up, and they're still running it. And that kind of rhythm and cadence of the L10s and the IDS. Outside of that, what's your favorite, EOS tool that you're still using, or that you see other people in your team still holding on to?
So, and I was struggling. I haven't been able to come up with it. When we first implemented, our implementer, Jim Kinnear, recommended that we use some software, and we used that very successfully. And I remember the cool thing about it was he, with his login, can see into all the partners he was an implementer for, and then we were using it internally. And I just cannot remember the name. Ultimately, as Jim Kinnear, facilitated with us for 5 quarters, and then went on to work with other partners, we started using 90.io, and we had we used it to the fullest. We had our accountability chart. We had everything in there. One of the things I remember is I ended up taking the visionary role, and Chris Butler took the integrator role. And I remember, even though I was 60% owner in the company, we decided that Chris Butler, the integrator, would sign contracts, right? We put that in the accountability chart. He's the one that had to make it work. Yeah. And it was so weird that I stopped signing the contracts, and Chris started signing the contracts. And it was like, for me, giving up that control, the thing that made it palatable was because we decided in an IDS that the integrator would be the one to sign the contracts. And it was freeing for me as the founder and visionary to allow that to happen. I don't know if that makes sense.
And I assume that there was an issue, right? That was the solve to something that came up that was like, hey, the best solution to this is that we move this role to this other function.
I think I committed to something that was hard to deliver on.
Yeah.
Right?
Typical visionary move, right? Once you move, you let go of your roots, and you're like,
yeah, exactly. But it was freeing to have that decision already made.
Yeah.
Right. And same thing with the tiebreaker. any kind of voting that occurred, the integrator is the tiebreaker because they're the ones that have to make it work. And on 3 occasions, the integrator had to break the tie, and they were against me as the
visionary, yeah,
the major shareholder.
Yeah,
right?
Wow, yeah.
But I was able to accept it because I knew, well, the integrator is the one that has to make it work.
Yeah.
And I don't regret that it went down against the way I voted.
Now, what for anyone who's considering EOS or self-implementing EOS, they're not with a formal implementer yet. Like, what's a tip that you'd want to leave them with? Just a point of advice that you discovered on your journey.
I think the biggest tip is inform everybody about what's happening, right? Like, leverage what the heck is EOS in your team. It's that common language that you have to get the whole company speaking the common language. And then the financial transparency. When you look at the lower maturity companies, the owner doesn't want to disclose any financial transparency. I really believe it's because they don't want anybody to know how little the company's actually making.
Yeah.
But as the company grows and matures a little bit, I try to get them to share gross margin information with the integrator, even if they keep the SG&A and net profit confidential. But again, as the company grows, they start to realize that, wait a minute, people want to work for a successful company, right? Having profitability is not an embarrassment. It's a requirement to keep the company healthy, and that people want to be part of a healthy company. And you'll see the more mature companies are very transparent in their financials. And that's a journey that each owner has to go on their own, but start on it.
And then, so you do a weekly YouTube live, correct?
Yeah. So as Pax8 Academy's grown, I brought this coaching piece to Pax8 to help the partners grow and mature their business. Pax8 clearly understands that if the companies mature the way they do business, it qualifies them to work with larger clients, and they're more clients because they're growing and they already have a commitment to Pax8. If we can help them grow, they buy more from Pax8. And, we call it partner enablement. And, the data's proven out that the companies that engage with Academy, our partners that engage with Academy, produce almost 4 times the margin per partner, presumably because they're growing and growing their businesses. And that's just an amazing stat. So we built this on-demand content, right? People could come use our enablement at any time. Any of our partners can sign in to academy.pax8.com and use the enablement. It's out there, and it's basically free if you're doing at least $500 a month with us, right? And then we also have the peer groups, right? So they were so impactful on me working with peers in the community that we built out peer groups. We have about 300 of our partners now actively engaged in the peer groups. And then we have these instructor-led courses. I think we have close to 40 different course topics in market, and we're trying to run, some of them monthly, some of them every 3 months, but pick a topic on how to run the business and come do an instructor-led course. And then we still have all the one-on-one coaching, and we've added sales methodologies to all 4 learning methods. We've added security, like get your security practice started. Data and AI is coming soon. So these it's all partner enablement, but part of that is a weekly live YouTube show. So it's YouTube/Pax8, and we have a weekly. We call it Academy Live, and we've been having a lot of fun. We're partway into our 2nd year of doing Academy Live, so there's a lot of stuff you can go watch. But
awesome. Well, this has been hugely valuable content. I think not just for MSPs, but for any entrepreneur. Going back to the idea of the E-Myth and getting started on your own, and then realize, now I'm not a producer. I'm running a business. And just through your journey and scale and growth and acquisition and being part of something bigger, it's really cool. And to see that regardless of EOS or, any branded operating system, that it was the idea of being intentional, with a system that really led you on that journey is really cool. So hopefully for MSBs, VARs, resellers, anybody out there, please go find Rex on YouTube at Pax8, and and you can probably on LinkedIn as well.
Yep. Yeah. /Rex Frank.
/Rex Frank. So Rex, thank you very much.
Thank you.